We're going to be talking about money, right? Who has it, who's making it, and how we can leverage the female economy to move our entire continent forward. Joining me on the panel is Léonie Ngolle, who is the Business Development Manager at L'Oréal Luxe in Sub-Saharan Africa. Raphael Benza, who has my favorite title, the Opportunity Creator at Fifth Season. And Nnenna Kankam, who is the Managing Principal of ANP Africa Group. So before we get started in the conversation, I wanted to, this morning I sort of, let me actually have something useful to say before we start. And so I did just a little quick research, and I wanted to share some numbers with you. So according to Deloitte, the African consumer market in 2024 is estimated to be worth over $1.4 trillion. It's estimated that African women control or influence between 65 and 80% of consumer spend. So that $1.4 trillion, African women control or influence up to 80% of that money. I want to let that sink in. In Africa, women start or manage approximately 25% of all businesses. Just to give you some context, in Europe, it's 5.7%. SMEs, as most of us know, account for about 90% of all businesses on the continent, and African women run or have founded 30% of registered SMEs. So this is not just informal petty traders, but actual registered formal businesses. And when we even come to the informal sector, we know that our big open markets are still the primary distribution networks on this continent, and they're run by women. So at the end of the day, in Africa, the business of women is business, right? And so that's really the framing that I want for this conversation. So my first question is, I guess, for each of you, from your specific thing, and I'll start with you, Léonie, where is the opportunity for L'Oréal in the African woman consumer?
So as I used to say, for me, Africa is a land of opportunity. So we have a lot of things to do and just have to be focused and check. If I have to be focused in my market, I can say that for me, the business is driven by fragrance. It represents 62% of the big business. In Africa, we love a big format of fragrance, like 100 ml, 150. Is more drive also by niche fragrances and oud. We love the fragrance that we can stay a long day. And sometimes even women used to buy a fragrance for men. So that's I can say. And after, followed by the skincare. So skincare market represents 20% of the business because now today more than ever, women realize that it is important to have a good skin on top of the makeup. You can have the good makeup, but if you don't have the beautiful skin, it's a problem. And to finish, I can say makeup. So makeup, I think for me in the luxury represent only 80% of the business. But on the mass market, I think we have another brand of in L'Oréal who called Maybelline is the most mass market who is driving the business because it's more accessible. So I can say fragrance, skincare, and makeup. And just to finish also, in terms of opportunity, I can say also training is a huge opportunity in there for business because when I visit my market, I used to notice that the beauty advisors, sometimes they are not very well trained. They don't know how to sell the product. They don't know how to identify the needs of the consumer. So I think I have a good trainer who can know my brand and know the gain light of my brand, but also know the consumer, African consumer. It is a key, and we really need that in Africa. And last but not least, I think if we want to have a business in Africa, maybe also we can have a more shopping area space. What I mean in terms of mall, we need more qualitative mall in order to allow the consumer to have the better shopping experience like we can see in Macy's or in Arrows or Sephora in France. So, yeah.
Okay, great. So there is this idea that part of a way to unlock more of the African female consumer is to create a better retail experience, which kind of segues into the question that I want to ask Raphael. So we see African creativity is just taking the world by storm: music, fashion, even film now. But there seem to be fewer women when the big stories happen. So I'm really interested to hear, actually, from your perspective, who are the women that are making moves, and what is their contribution, not just creatively, but financially, in front and behind the scenes?
Well, thank you. Um, Hello, everybody. Good. So from we're in the music business. That's the business that we're in. And if you're asking me about who are the leaders, I would have to tell you that one of the number one bright star right now is Tyler. Right? Most people know Tyler. Well, so the manager of Tyler is a female, Charlene, and the record label owner of Tyler is a female. Burna Boy's manager, it's a female. The biggest Amapiano champions right now, who are Kapsa and Maparisa, the management team is led by a female. So we may not actually put them in the limelight, but they are very, very, very active. Even our business in South Africa is the number one independent record label and agency, and it's been ran for the last 10 years by a woman, my business partner. So I think we just need to highlight them because they are there. They are the movers and shakers, and they are making some great strides, and they are breaking down the ceilings and actually making things happen, but they're behind the scenes. So what I think perhaps we need to do is probably expose them more, because I can tell you who they are because I'm in the industry and I see them and I work with them and I have a lot to do with them. But what we should be thinking about so that they can inspire the other young people who want to get into the business but only think is in front and it's not behind. So we haven't really solved that yet, but we're looking to solve it. And I think platforms like this and the other ones that are there, we should make a true effort to dig more and see who's behind these big stars and actually bring them to limelight.
And that's been a theme, I think, throughout the whole day, the importance of visibility and modeling, right? When young women see what is possible, I think also young men, right? When young men see women achieving and understand what women can do, it's easier for them when a peer, for instance, right, is doing something. It's easier for them to say, okay, yes, my girl can do it because it's what women do. So Nnenna, coming to you, as someone who advises both businesses and investors, we talk about the funding gap all the time, right? But where do you think, or how do you think we can better leverage the opportunity? Because we also hear that female founders tend to do better. So how do we leverage and mine that resource?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I think when I look at the funding landscape right now, I think there are, investors move in packs, right? So things that excite some investors start exciting other investors. So I think, you have these moments and you have these categories that have been of interest, right? So I think microcredit is extremely important for women. I think it creates a cycle of empowerment for women. It enables women to start having businesses and to start having a voice. And I think that actually does really matter. It's not huge and it's not something that smacks you in the face as it happens, right? But I think over time, you'll start seeing the impact of that. I think also you then see, these big tech-enabled businesses. That's another moment that's happening now, right? And there's capital flowing over the last couple of years to Africa. So you can see some women get funded who are backing, I think, again, businesses that are in the categories that investors have expressed interest in. FinTech, I mean, we know what those are, right? I think for me, the real opportunity and the real way to make a true impact, if you're thinking about unlocking female entrepreneurship or women's contribution to the economy, is figuring out what promising SMEs need, how you can serve them, and how you can identify them. I have two examples of just kind of, I think, the gap that exists within that space. One is one of them I was kind of very closely involved in. I advise a couple fashion brands on the continent, brands that I'm sure a lot of you know. One of them was approached by an investor who offered a few $1 million, and everybody was very excited, right? Because we needed the funding, we needed the financing, and so we were reviewing the term sheet in a board meeting, and we had a clear sense of what we needed, right? What we needed to unlock growth. I asked the question, okay, does this investment team have any of these capabilities? Are they connected to anybody that can help us do these things? The answer was no, right? And so we were very excited about the money. The money, of course, comes with covenants. So if we start breaching those covenants, there's some serious issues around the ownership and the control of the company. And so I think in that case, we ultimately said no, because we were able to kind of identify that we had specific needs that we needed smart money for, right? So we didn't just need the money, we needed the advice, the support, the development of the investors. I think you see that on a broader scale. There's a woman that started a African luxury and fashion focused private equity fund. That was the intention. She raised a bunch of money, she had a bunch of backers globally. She started trying to identify companies. She found that they actually were not investable, right? They weren't ready to receive the level of investment that she wanted to give. They needed very simple things around professionalizing the business, right? Helping them figure out their financial statements. A lot of people have accounting ledgers and not financial statements. They actually don't really know what's going on in the business. In her case, she was able to go back to her investors and say, look, we still want to help these businesses. We still think there's promise, but they need a different type of support. And so she has now pivoted and is offering working capital, right? So capital to just help these women support the daily operations of their business, make incremental change, et cetera. That's not as exciting of a story. It's not as exciting of an area for people to launch a business in, but I think it's really important, right? And I think what it does is it allows you to start identifying winners in that SME space that you can then take and launch to the next level. And I think ultimately that's what we want, right? We want these women-led businesses to grow to scale. We want other women to see this. We want other investors to see this. We want other people in the value chain to see that women can run these businesses and they can be successful. And we want to galvanize all the support that comes as a result of that. But what I think we really need to do is like the very kind of hard work around identifying and supporting female-owned SMEs. And that is usually not just throwing money, right? It might be accelerator programs. It might be really working on pipeline. And so I think that's a big gap that, when people are choosing what to do, right? You choose something that is either easy or something that will tell a nice story. It's hard to choose something that's hard and people might not understand for some time.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing that you talked about, sort of relevant money, right? So with smart money, but relevant solutions for female entrepreneurs. And I was really thinking about when you were talking about the kinds of products that, and I think even on the entertainment side, how do we create more relevant products, solutions, content that's going to unlock, because again, if African women are controlling 80% of consumer spend, we've got to be, and if they are running, 25% of the businesses on the continent, we've got to be building things, designing things for them. So I guess from the L'Oreal perspective, what is your approach to product development to make sure that we're creating products that African women actually want and not just cutting and pasting what we're seeing in other markets?
For me, I will say before a long time ago, we used to create a product based on European needs. It is true, we have to say that. But since a few years now, we very focus on Africa because, as I say, we noticed that Africa is a next big thing, and it's very important to consider the consumer. And I think this morning we say that it is very important to be on the table and when a decision is making. So that's why I think in L'Oreal, like for me, it's a part of my job to be part of the decision to make sure that my consumer needs are respected, understanding. So that's why, for instance, I can give you some example. Last year, we launched the new fragrance, Ralph Lauren's Polo Oud, and it was a new fragrance design only for Africa and Middle East country. And to launch it, they decide to take an international brand ambassador. And I say, guys, it's not possible. You can go to my dead body if you want to do that. So that's why we decide, and we sign CK as a brand ambassador of Polo Oud. And for us, it was a huge victory because it is the first African brand ambassador of the luxury brand. And on Maybelline side, also, you can say we sign area staff for Maybelline. So that's why I think it's very important to understand consumer needs and also have someone who they can identify to identify easily. Because the big company like L'Oreal and other, long time ago, we used to say, okay, Africa is like, don't kill me, but like Africa is like one country, but it's not. We need to understand the need of each consumer. My Nigerian consumer have a need different from my French-speaking African consumer, who is different from my Kenyan consumer. So for me, my strategy is to have international marketing strategy, and I come in Africa on each country and try to localize it. So localize product to understand my consumer.
Okay, that's really interesting on the consumer product side that you can build relevance by really localizing. And I love the fact that you pushed for an African ambassador. So Raphael, one of the things that we hear, and this is not an African thing, right? We hear, especially in music, that female artists have limited marketability. And that there's only a small number of them, right? In fact, there's a big conversation going on right now about who is an arena artist. So for African female creators, how can we help them scale? Because one of the things that we've seen, I mean, I guess Afrobeats is the example in Amapiano, is that it really blew up when it crossed the border on the continent. And it was when the whole continent embraced the sound that the world did. So what are the things that we can do to create more space for female creators across the continent so that we have more than one Tyler?
Okay. Well, you've asked us some very good questions. I think to support your percentage, right? There should be female stadium artists, because when we look at the back end of our consumers, it is 60% female who are consuming the music that's on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. When we look at the percentage of women that attend, people who are attending concerts and shows, it is over 60% women. Literally, Afrobeat became Afrobeat because women loved it. You know, women were singing it, they were dancing to it, the words in the songs reminded them of home, and so on, right? So you would think with those numbers, it should be women on the stadiums, and there should be women who are touring. Why are they not? I think it's a bit of a perception. It's a bit of perception that they can't handle that big of a stage. And I think it's a perception from traditional-minded people. The people who we've worked with artists who have done, 500 room and killed it, and have done 5,000 up to 15,000 stadiums, and have done it. I think we need to break the perception, and I think it's not just the perception from the promoters or the venues. It's us in the room too. We were go and buy the music, we will go and play the music, and we'll go dance to the music, but we may not be fully in it to support the women. And if you're not in there fully to support the women and back them, so it's not just funds, but just to back them and make them know that they can be as big and they can do big things as the Burna Boys of the world and the Wizkids of the world, we won't get there. So I think one of the solutions would be to rework the perception that we have that women can be great. I think the numbers are showing that women have the money, women love music, women carry music all day long. Men may play music when they're at a barbecue, but women play music very, 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 very first thing in the morning. They play it for any sort of celebration. They play it also for sad times when they're heartbroken. So we need to figure out, and I think it's in ourselves, because the industry won't change. The industry won't change. They know where they're gonna make their money from, and it's money driven. So they won't change unless we in the room, we're consumers, especially women, start to back our women to put them on those big stages.
And then I want to bring this to you because this is sort of a continuum of a conversation, right? So we have the money, right? We are controlling the money. Mm-hmm. We're running the businesses. The businesses we're building are successful. But then there's a challenge of scale, right? It's always like the tipping point of I do the SME thing. I do, I'm as we say in Nigeria, local champion. But the challenge is in the scaling. And you talked about, and I know that you've been advising some SMEs, and you talked about how you find the right ones. One, what are the things that you look for? Like, what are the things that women who are running businesses, and I think that this even applies to women who are creating art or thinking about product, what is required to scale? Because I think you're right, the world won't change, so we must understand what we need to do to be able to change the world.
Yeah. So I don't like identify companies, but I work with them, so I can speak from that perspective. But I think I think scaling is it's a continent-wide problem, right? It's a problem within Africa. It's hard to scale businesses. It's hard for even well-capitalized businesses to scale. It's hard to produce competitively on the continent, right? Especially it's a global world. Goods come in from everywhere. They're sometimes subsidized by governments, or just sometimes far more competitively produced. So I think scale is generally an issue. I think women, and like most things, right? Women will find themselves at a further disadvantage when seeking to scale versus men. I think what's important to have before you attempt to scale is, I think, a good amount of understanding of what your company is, who you serve, what your needs are. I think what I've seen is that scaling is very expensive for a lot of these brands. So a lot of times if a brand needs to scale a fashion product, they end up looking to produce outside of the country, right? So then that entails traveling, finding factories. Factories have minimum order quantities. Even if the item can be produced far more cheaply than locally, maybe it can be far more standardized, so there's some benefits there. By the time you import the product and you pay all those costs, you then find products to be quite expensive for these local markets. So I think it's important to have a really strong perspective and point of view, and I think that's why it's really about identifying those SMEs that have that level of readiness. They just need to kind of have the skills developed or the connections made, because I think it's an endeavor that will end up like burning a lot of companies on the continent until we have better infrastructure, better manufacturing capabilities, kind of even an easier time at expanding into domestic markets outside of the metro areas that we serve, right? We're kind of a bit strangled as businesses. So then you say, okay, you need to scale, you want to scale. So then in some cases you can scale. It's expensive. Maybe you don't have an outlet now to sell the items, right? Because actually I can't move the items outside of Accra. So I now have all this product. I'm either shipping it overseas, DHL, it's $30, blah, 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 right? A lot of issues. Or you just don't have enough information or enough insight or enough of a track record to even make it worth your while.
So as you kind of think, the world is the world, and there are very real structural, infrastructural, systemic challenges. One of the things we talk about at Africa Soft Power all the time is how can we leverage technology to be able to at least find a workaround while we're working on fixing. So, and I think we have brand and product on the stage, we have content and creator on the stage, and we have advisory and money on the stage. One, how can we use technology to build connections and collaborate, right? Because I think across these different sort of parts of the business of women, there's similar problems, right? Like we've all talked about the same thing. So how can we use technology to connect so that the people who have the ideas and the people who are trying to move the product and the people that have money and guidance can find each other and work together? So I guess, Raphael, let me start with you. Like, because I think when you started talking about Spotify, I thought there's so much data there. Yeah. How can we use that to, for instance, maybe unlock something for brand or to convince someone to give us money?
We're already doing it, right? We're already doing it with brands are now figuring out that the influence of the artist is actually the biggest marketing tools that they can use. Now, I don't know from your side what kind of data you keep, and what you do with that data once you say you activate an artist for a 3-month period or 6 months period. Maybe that's something that we can have a conversation about. But from our side, the apps that you use for your music can tell us to the smallest details about where you live, what you do, um, what kind of other music you like to do, what kind of places you like to go. And with those kind of information, even though the proprietor's information, we can't get it out of Spotify, and we can't really get it out of Apple Music, but we can extrapolate from what we do and what we have. And I guess maybe this is where you would come in, because in order for me to talk to Maybelline, I probably need funding or some sort of support from you to help us create some sort of I guess I want to say an app or some sort of mechanism to help us figure out how do we price the information, the data that we have, in order for it to be worthy to someone like Maybelline.
So Nnenna, so I'm interested in how to Raphael's point, right? How do we build those mechanisms? And I guess in the work that you've done, how have business, especially female-run businesses, used technology to be able to create workarounds for some of this stuff?
Yes. Oh.
Okay, if I could just add, I say, before use technology to do activation, we use also data to create the right product. For instance, I can come back again on the makeup. Before being on the luxury position, I was in charge of Maybelline New York for French-speaking Africa country. And when I start my job, we have only 6 border. So for the whole Africa, so it was not enough. So I think that with the technology now, we are able to have shade matching to know a different skin for the different African women, in order to have more diversity in terms of foundation, in terms of powder. Today we have more than 20 powder with Maybelline. Same thing with Lancome, where we have 45 shades. So we use technology to identify the right ingredient, the right thing we need to create the right product before go on the activation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? So I think once you have a platform, using the technology that reduces any hurdles to purchase or to engagement makes sense, right? So shade matching, if you're selling sunglasses and you can do that technology that lets the person put the phone up to their face and try on the sunglass, those things all matter. I think obviously the big thing is social media, right? So you can create an Instagram account, you can create a TikTok account, you can create an account that allows you to connect directly to your customers and your would-be customers. I think the moment we're in, which I think is really beneficial for all of us, right, and all these African brands, that the diaspora, right, is now feeling very connected, largely because of the music, right? So now I think some of the brands that I advise, take advantage of this moment, right? So start running some Instagram ads, start venturing out, spend more time on your social media marketing, because what you can do is start understanding who's even connecting with you, how they're interacting with you. As much as I just said, okay, yeah, you have to ship for $30, DHL, et cetera. People can't return things, et cetera. It is actually, I think, very beneficial. And so one of the things, I don't remember exactly what your question was, but one of the things I thought of in the last few minutes as we were speaking was, for me, a lot of the brands that I advise are, Ghana-based, Nigeria-based. Currencies are all over the place. A lot of the inputs are in, USD, euros, pounds. It's really tough, right? There's not room to kind of move the pricing in the domestic markets. So, I am saying, look, focus as much as you can on exporting for those that will consume in this moment, because you have this moment where you have attention, right? People will see an ad for Christy Brown, and they'll be sitting in Atlanta, right? And maybe they never would have paid attention to it before, but now they're feeling this connection to Africa, and so they will engage with it. And so I think as much as you can, kind of hedge against the operating context in these countries, start getting in hard currency, start figuring out who your consumer might be abroad. Maybe that's a different consumer, right? Maybe you start thinking about your collection differently. There are things that you make that people abroad can buy and will buy. There are things that you make and you source the materials differently and you construct them differently. to weather out the storm domestically. But I think social platforms and then digital tools, once you have your own platform and you can drive people to them, are important. Obviously, if you go through Spotify's, Amazon's, all of these platforms, right? I mean, their competitive advantage is the data, so they're not going to give it to you in a way that's going to be extremely useful. But you can learn what you can, right? And more information is better than no information, and it's all a process.
Okay, so do we have any, before we get to our final thoughts, do we have any questions from the audience? Anybody have any questions for the panelists? Nkiru, can someone get Nkiru a microphone?
Thanks. Great job, guys. I wanted to, maybe it's a comment. So in terms of women as consumers and, buying and selling and supply and demand, I feel like we're still talking around, I think one of the key issues that we don't own platforms. So we're talking about, marketing on Instagram, doing this, doing that. But I sort of like look around the room and I see like everybody, or almost everybody in this room, every female is wearing hair, which we've paid for in one form or the other. And who owns hair, or who sells hair, who's producing all this hair? It's a bunch of men, either in China or somewhere else, not owned by Africans. Makeup. Generally, all the big makeup brands are not owned by Africans. And I think it's the same issue when it comes to platforms like Instagram or Facebook or whatever. We don't own the platform, so we don't actually control. We don't actually know what the data is. And until we can connect the dot in terms of owning the platforms, or so if you're the producer of hair or whatever it is, that because people are making billions of dollars on makeup and hair. I mean, I'm wearing fake hair. And I think that's one of the core things that's missing. We're still having micro conversations. And I wonder what the big picture is in terms of how we can connect that dot.
Well, I mean, not to toot our own horn, but I think that it's actually convenings like this, because this is where you surface that issue. Because I think we've been talking about it all through the day, right? That part of the challenge that we have, and the reason that Africa Soft Power began, was that we wanted to own not just our story and our narrative, but also own the trajectory, right, of our progress. So to Nkiru's point, and I think this comes back to the question of scale. And we have very real, right, issues around the difficulty of it. But how can we begin to build ownership at scale for these platforms so that we are the ones that are benefiting from that $1.4 trillion that that Africans are spending? 80% of that is African women, right? And most of that is not being, that money isn't going to businesses that are run by Africans. So what is the thing that we need to do to switch that?
You're looking at me.
I'm looking at you because you're looking at me.
I'm looking at you. I mean, look, I very much appreciate that comment and that question, and I think it's really important. I'm like a strategic operator, right? There's like a lofty North Star, then there's like a midterm plan, and then there's like, what are we going to do in the next 12 months, and how do we measure it? So I would say yes, like ideally one day where there be like an African TikTok and we owned it and it was ours and we distributed all of our own content. Absolutely, right? And I hope we get there. I think as of now, I actually think and I'm a believer in like targeted incrementalism, right? So I actually think it's a really important and really commendable feat for a brand to have a direct-to-consumer platform that they can stock with inventory, that they can sell on, that they can collect data on, that they can own to that degree, right? And I think that, the way I look at these big platforms is that they're gathering places of the world. And so I think their benefit is that everybody is there. And if you can grab those people and drive them to your own platform, right, or your own art, whatever it might be, right, and then you can serve people exactly what they need by localizing, by understanding your consumer, et cetera, then I think the runway that will provide for most of these businesses and most of these economies is pretty significant. I think eventually, naturally, right, as the continent becomes kind of more of an economic participant, as more creativity comes out of the continent, as very well capitalized investors pour all of the money you need to start these sorts of platforms into the entrepreneurs on the continent, I think we'll get there. I don't know, again, back to like readiness, I don't know that we're writing. I don't know that we need to do that right now. I think there's a lot of companies that could benefit from like leveraging the structures that are out there and building something of their own, and then creating a flywheel that allows them to go from there.
Yeah. I mean, I get, and I think it's also important to think about what happens in the short, medium, and long term. And if the medium term is owned platforms, what are the steps we need to take to get there, Raphael? When we think about music specifically and distribution and publishing, right? And that's and that's not just it's a global thing, but African artists are driving the music industry right now. We don't own any of the distribution, right? And so, are we really the ones that are benefiting from it? And if Africans in general aren't benefiting, I'm sure African women are benefiting even less. So when it comes to music and content, how do we begin to own our distribution? Do we leave electronic and just work on live? What do we do now to get ourselves to a place where we can have an African Spotify? What's the path there?
Well, I don't know if African Spotify is the one that you really want, because it may not be the biggest percentage of the money that comes in, right? We have to be very strategic about where the money's at, right? So it's not to say that we don't have the brains in this room or the app developed to not create a Spotify. It can be done, but Spotify and Apple, they don't take a majority of an artist's money. They really just probably 15 to 20%. The money that the artists make is shows, is events and shows. So what the funding should be, and what we really should be trying to capitalize on, is creating touring and venues. Now that one, they can't take that away from us, because it's our land, it's in our country, and we can create our venues, and we can create a touring circuit. So those are the kind of things that we're working on. Those are the kind of things that you talk to VCs and funders and even government to help you implement. So just like she mentioned, one step at a time. But I think we go for it's a low-hanging fruit, because that's where the money is coming from, and it can be done here. I don't believe, and we've been thinking about it for the last 5 years, do we compete with Spotify and YouTube, or do we compete with Live Nation? Live Nation, if you don't know, Live Nation is the #1 touring agency in North America, and they can make their money because they own the venue, they own the suites, and where you get your drinks, they own the merchandising. So that can be replicated here without the need of them. And those are the kind of things that we're thinking about, we want to do for 2025 and on. I think places like Rwanda is already doing that, but we need more countries to get on board and do that. But if one of you managed to build a distribution company in Spotify, we'll be the first one to put our music on there. Okay.
That's interesting, because actually, Léonie, you also talked about the need for venues, for retail venues. So maybe there's a partnership there, brand and content. So we're out of time, so I do want to leave just one. I would like you all to leave us with one thought. And so the 1.4 trillion is now. In 10 years, it'll be 2.5 trillion that African consumers spend. And women will influence and control 65 to 80% of that. So if somebody is looking to get that money, where do you think the greatest opportunity is for the business of women in Africa right now? Like, where should I be going to get my share of the money that's already on the table? We'll start with you, Léonie, and we'll go down.
Okay. For me, before answering your question, maybe I want to say that nobody knows African consumer than Africa themselves. So for me, I want to say that the beauty business is have a huge opportunity. But I think that we still don't have enough African brand, African qualitative brand. So I will be very proud, excited to have one of my competition who is African brand. So of course it will be a hard time for me, but I will be so proud to have one of competition has is African brand and sister of international brand. So you as African woman, African men, take the lead on the business and the beauty business industry in Africa. So, as I say, skincare, makeup, everything. We have a lot of natural product, natural ingredient, because all the international product that we create based off our local ingredient. So take the lead and go ahead.
I guess I'll be adding on to that, because just like the scenario that I give you, the reality actually that I give you about some of our biggest export stars are managed, or the record labels is run by women. So if women is the biggest consumer, and women have shown that they can actually lead and they can actually make a business profitable, I think, especially in my industry, which is music and creative industry, I think all major labels and all management agencies should just be led and run by women. And so that's, for me, that's the solution.
I'm all for that. Hannah?
I'm not gonna have like that kumbaya of an answer, unfortunately. I love that though. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I do know that I think why women are so impactful is that, especially in the African context, we manage money for households, right? So we understand our needs, we understand children's needs, we understand families' needs, we understand men's needs, right? And so I think, and you see that in other economies where women play a bigger role, right? Like they're able to come in and say, look, I see something wrong with the education system because I've seen my children go through it, right? And I have this community of mothers at the same space, and I'm able to create something that can make a change. So I think it really is just kind of sticking by the women, and I think remembering the women, right? There's a book, maybe some people in the audience have read, called Half the Sky, which talks about a lot of things about women in the developing world, and a lot of kind of very terrible things that women pass through. But it also just is this idea that there's just a bunch of lost, leverage and opportunity because women are not kind of factored in or nurtured or supported or funded. So I think it really is just about ensuring that we are driving the participation of women, because that is how we actually unleash the full value of our economies. And I think it's also how we find the right spots, right? Whether it's in any of these different creative industries or any industry really, right? It's just ensuring, as somebody said earlier, that you're kind of scanning the whole population for the best insert blank to support and fund to drive growth.
Right. We just want to give one more opportunity if there are any questions, comments.
Hi, thanks so much for a great discussion. I was curious, there was another conference like this that I was at that Ava DuVernay was talking, and after Tyler Perry closed his studios, right, for a minute. And she was really excited about AI in a way that most people would view as a threat. And so I was curious about the thought that leveraging AI actually, and to the extent that people are using mobile and you can get to Copilot and ChatGPT on your phone, I actually think that makes it very easy. You can build a company, a hair company, literally, and a business plan, like within minutes, right? And so, to the extent that, are you seeing people using that? Or how do you see some of those changes in technology, being really expediting the value chain in Africa?
Okay, so then, so you advise businesses, right? So, for the female-run businesses that you advise, how are they using technology to facilitate or speed up their progress?
So technology they use quite a bit. I think AI, people are scared of AI, especially creatives, right? Because it feels, I think rightfully so, it feels like something that can take away your specific value. And I think that is helped by situations like some of these big mass brands ripping off designs, right? And then selling them for far lower. Again, production is expensive for a variety of reasons. So I wouldn't say that there's a lot, I've seen a lot of embrace of AI. I don't think that's specific to Africa or to African female entrepreneurs. I think, maybe with more time, more of a sense of like business cases or use cases of how it can be used to your benefit. I think people are scared of even feeding their own information. I guess a lot of it's accessible, right? But people don't want to feed their information in because I don't want now somebody else to create my design. So I don't really see that as a very big factor right now. I think people are talking about it, but I haven't seen it impact any of the businesses I've advised or seen.
And the great thing is we have a whole panel on this topic tomorrow, so we can go into it into more in depth. There was one more hand at the back.
Thank you for the interesting conversation. My question is around like the divergence that we see on consumerism, i.e., we talk about 52 African countries, but we get to see what's exported is like Afrobeats, Mapiano, like 2 or 3 genres. What would you advise artists that are like, based in Equatorial Guinea or Seychelles or Lesotho in terms of exporting their music? Because they can't do Amapiano or Afrobeats like a Nigerian can, right? They don't have the nuances of like accent and everything, even though they may be able to copy the style. So because the industry seems to kind of diverge towards one or two, I mean, the Academy has Afrobeats as a category. How would you advise people from minority countries to be able to export their art?
Well, I think you should stick with localization, right? You should just stick with the music because that's true to you. Afrobeat and Amapiano, they have the shine right now, but doesn't mean that they're gonna have the shine forever. So you can try to induce some of that into your music that your local music is playing. But I won't suggest to you that you leave your music and move over there, because it's just because Amapiano Afrobeat is maybe in the top 2 or 3, but you have rumba that's doing very well. You have other music. You have African traditional music that's also touring. It's just that Amapiano and Afrobeat is the commercial leaders right now, but they may not be that in the next 5 years or 10 years. Yeah, do you remember, even with music out of Jamaica, it was dancehall, or reggae was first king, but the dancehall artists came later, and then there's soca and there's calypso and so on and so forth. So don't jump from your home country music and your language and your style. Be patient, wait your turn. Collaborate with those guys who are leading the pack right now, but I think keep it local and keep it unique. It will have its time for shine. We've been working this Afrobeat thing for 35 years. And it's just now, it's just gonna have its time for now. Yours will come.
So thank you. So that brings us to the end of the panel and the end of the day. Thank you so much to my panelists. Thank you so much for the audience. And I just want to leave you with this one thought, right? I come back to that $1.4 trillion that Africans are spending today in 2024. That is the value of the African consumer market. And African women control or influence up to 80% of that number. The business of women in Africa is the business of Africa, right? Women as consumers are the opportunity. So if you're building a business, build a business that has women at the center. Thank you.